Hey, what's happening, everybody? I'm Larry Roberts, and this is another episode of the Readily Random Podcast.
Hey, you could be larger than life, bigger than the world.
I have two amazing guests with me today, and I want to introduce each of them separately because they're just phenomenal, both in their own right, as well as when they came together for the reason that we're having this show today. But first off, we have Jason Pfeiffer in the house, and Jason Pfeiffer is the editor-in-chief of Entrepreneur Magazine. So if you want to get rich today, this is the episode you listen to. And we have Jennifer Miller with us as well. And Jennifer is a phenomenal author with multiple titles to her credit. She's also an author for the New York Times. She's been published in Slate Magazine, Washington Post, and a variety of other platforms as well. So Jason, Jennifer, thank you so very much for taking time out of your both busy days to join me on the podcast.
Thanks for having us.
How was that for an intro? Did I do good?
That was great.
Yeah,
excellent.
Also, you got a great radio voice.
Yeah,
I'm loving it.
Well, don't hesitate to offer me a job. So it's cool. No, I'm just kidding. No, so we're here today. The both of you, and you're obviously in separate places, so technology is so cool. But you've both came together and you wrote a rom-com novel. That if I understand the concept, and I don't want to give it all away, you two probably know it a lot better than I do since I haven't had a chance to read it yet. But it's a man and a woman that happened to, she wrote a column. They got together, had a little fun the night before. She wrote a column assessing his performance. He read said column and wrote a response. And then next thing you know, the two of them, they meet and they take this project on where for 30 days, they have sex every night for 30 days, which congratulations on that, guys. But and then they evaluate each other's performance. Did I get that right?
So you almost got it right.
Dang it!
So you were so close. No, so the book is called Mr. Nice Guy, and so yes, you have the setup right, but it's not every day for 30 days. This is a weekly rendezvous that happens for many months. So, yes, cheers to anyone who can have sex every day for 30 days.
Yeah, I'm 46, and I'm like, nah.
But yes, the setup is right. Our protagonist is Lucas. He is a, early 20-something, drops out of law school, breaks up with his fiance, moves to New York to make it in magazines. One night he goes home with a beautiful woman, has what he considers to be probably the best night of his life, and then he opens up a copy of the magazine that he is working for and realizes that he has been critiqued by the magazine's own sex columnist, and she has torn him to shreds.
Oh my gosh. So what inspired this book?
Yeah, what could possibly inspire something like this? Yeah. So it goes back to me in my 20s. I never did this with Jen or anyone, but I had gotten a email from a sex columnist who I knew who I had known about her. She was looking for freelance writing advice. I was a few years out of college and had written for some magazines, and she had just graduated college and was looking for some advice. And we traded emails for quite a while, just totally professional, nothing sexy. But in corresponding with this sex columnist, this idea popped into my head. What would happen if two people each week slept together and then critically reviewed each other's performance in a magazine? Like, just as a thought experiment, what would come next? What would their relationship be like? How could anybody function like this? And I kicked the idea around and I thought, this could be a really fun novel. I tried to write it a number of times over the next really 15 years.
Wow.
And then, or maybe 10 years or whatever it was. And then I told Jen about it when we were dating. And I just could not write this thing. I am not a fiction writer. I'm a nonfiction writer. I didn't know how to do it. And after Jen sold her most recent novel, she asked me what I thought she should do next. And I said, well, you should write my novel. Write this idea that I am never going to do myself. And she said, let's do it together. And that is where the project began.
That's awesome. So now, did we do this by testing the waters and doing some evaluations between the two of you to see where it went? And obviously you stayed married, but how?
That's a great question. So we actually had experimented a little bit in this realm a few years earlier when Jason and I were dating. I was working on what became my debut novel. And, we were at the point in the relationship where things were maybe about to get serious. And I realized that if Jason didn't like my writing, I didn't think this relationship was going anywhere. So I did a really dumb thing and asked him if he would do some editing on the novel that I was working on, which, could have been a total disaster. Fortunately, he not only liked the book, but turned out to be a really good editor, not, constructive criticism.
There you go.
So that's kind of how we knew that we worked well together. And then we decided to divide up the work, which, for Mr. Nice Guy, which, really helped, that delegation helped us kind of, we collaborated, but we stayed in our lanes to a certain extent, and we've come out of it still married.
That's great. Because I've self-published a book, nothing like what you guys have done, but I self-published, and my wife was my editor as well. And it might have caused just a little bit of tension. I'm not going to say we fought over it or anything, but we might have.
It's easy to. This is when you're working with anybody, there's going to be tension. It's extra complicated if you're working with someone who you're close with or married to. And then I think especially if there's a creative element involved, which is so abstract, right? Oftentimes there's just no way to know what the right decision is in a creative project. There's a lot of fault lines that you really have to navigate.
Right. How long did it take you guys to write the book? I'm sure there were various drafts, right? And
yeah.
What was the time frame like?
So the whole thing, I would say, like, the conceiving of it and the writing of it and the rewriting of it and the further rewriting of it probably took about 3 years, maybe 3.5 years.
Wow. Okay.
And then once you actually sell the book, then it's at least a year before the book comes out. So, then for the last year, we've been, working on the marketing and the publicity and really trying to take that on largely ourselves as well. So yeah, it's been a good 4 years.
Wow. That's a long time, honestly. I don't think people realize the effort that goes into writing a fiction piece. Nonfiction for me, and this is speaking back to what Jason said, nonfiction for me is much easier to write. If I could write a technical manual or do some technical writing, I can pull that off. But to sit down and say, Jane went to the movies and she watched this cool movie and she liked it a whole lot, and then she went home and had a glass of wine. I can't write that because that's exactly what I would write.
Yeah, it's really hard creating something from nothing. It's hard to stare at that blank page. Jason, did you have that experience when you did write some of the scenes?
Yeah. I think that I ultimately was able to write fiction in this novel in a way that I had never been able to do before. And I think the reason that I was able to do it was because Jen had already created so much of the universe, right? I was already picking up on characters that she had really developed very well. Like, we plotted it out together, right? So like we created conceptually what the characters were together. But then when she sits down and puts words into their mouths and moves them through this world, that's a level of detail and realism that I had an impossible time conjuring up myself. But once it was there, I found that I was able to apply my nonfiction logical brain to fiction because I could pick up the pieces that she had created, these characters who act in this certain way, who are doing this thing, who are living in this world, right? Like, fiction is all about creating a logic structure and then following that logic structure through. And the problem is that I have a hard time creating the logic structure. Who are the characters? What are they doing? What's the world? How does it operate? But once you establish that, I found that I could pick up and run with it a lot easier because I felt like I was able to plug my brain into it better.
Well, it's kind of maybe like one of those like role-playing video games, right? Where like the world is there and then you can just move your avatar around.
That's a really great, that's a really great comparison.
Walking into a wall over and over again, like on SNL this weekend, which actually happens a lot in fiction. When you're writing it, you feel like you're just walking into a wall over and over again.
It's similar to podcasting as well. And Jason, I know you have 2 podcasts. Jennifer, I don't know. I didn't find any information as to whether or not you had a podcast or not. Do you have a podcast?
I do not have a podcast.
Well, then Jason can relate, and I don't mean to leave you out there, Jennifer, but you run into that wall as well with a podcast. You do your research, you find out what's going on with your guests and how you can maximize the effectiveness of their appearance on your show, and not only that, but maximize the exposure that you provide your guests. But sometimes you'll find yourself running into that wall by going, I don't know what else to ask. I've asked all the questions. What do I do now? And we're only 10 minutes in. What do I do now? So I can relate to that 100% from this perspective. So let me ask you, Jennifer, you said you guys delegated to each other and you stayed in your own lanes. What did those lanes look like, and how were they comprised?
Yeah. Well, as Jason said, so I wrote most of the narrative. So, I mean, it was really sitting down and just starting to think, all right, well, where does this book open? And a scene kind of came to me in my mind. So the book opens on Lucas, who is going to work at Empire magazine, which we kind of envisioned as like a trashier New York magazine. And he works in One World Trade, which is, if your listeners live in New York or have been in New York, it's this huge gleaming tower with an antenna that points. I think when I saw it, I had this idea in my head. The antenna points to the sky, kind of in the way that a baseball player points out to, the outfield for a home run. Like, yeah, I am knocking this out of the park, right? And Lucas, he's like this young, very naive, but very ambitious kid. And he's kind of got that bravado. He kind of swaggers into the office. And then, of course, he gets his comeuppance again and again. But really from there, I just started leading him through that world and trying to figure out, like, what is happening in the office in this magazine? Who are the weird people he works with? What are the crazy parties? I mean, so much of this is based on our own experiences working in media in New York. And we have had a lot of crazy experiences going to parties where ridiculous things happen, where editors are like so over the top, so petty, so competitive. And so we just funneled all of that I funneled that into all the scenes in the novel. I wanted it to be exciting for people who may not have lived that world and want to peek into what it was.
Right. And Jason, how did you complement that?
Yeah, well, so the characters, once they start writing the columns, all the columns are in the book. So I wrote all the columns, which was drawing from my experience, in magazines and newspapers, in which, and I've been a columnist myself, so I knew how to embody that voice. And actually, I found that once we understood who these characters were, I had a really good sense of how to write from both their perspectives. People often assume that what we did is we split it up by gender, and Jen wrote the kind of female stuff and I wrote the male stuff, but we actually kind of split it up by like writing style. and so I did both, and which was really fun, because what I often did is when I wrote the female characters columns, and she's criticizing the male character, right? So Carmen and Lucas. So when I was writing Carmen's columns and she's criticizing Lucas, what I ultimately was doing was kind of imagining how women probably criticized younger versions of me.
Wow.
And so, because I don't really know. I mean, I have a hard time putting myself into a woman's head at like that moment where she's criticizing this guy she's having sex with. I can definitely imagine my own errors. And so that's what I often drew upon.
That did not work out like I thought it was going to work out. Yeah.
Yeah. And then as Jen said, I also wrote a couple scenes, and then Jen also edited the columns. And so we then sort of traded the roles and could have did some oversight over each. But that's how it was. And but I got to say the most interesting. I mean, just listening to the way that Jen was describing building the world, it feels very much like you are building the sidewalk while you're walking down it. So you got to figure out, like, you got to kind of lay the groundwork, and then you take a step on top of it, and then you lay the next thing. And it's like, because you can't just move characters around like they're action figures and you're 3 years old, right? And it's like, suddenly he's over there, and now he's over there, and now he's doing this thing, right? Like, it has to make sense, which means that every part of it, from the character to the world to the other people that they're around, all have to work in a kind of logical harmony, which is not something that I had really thought about until this project, and I'm very attracted to the process of it now.
That's cool. I'm curious. Both of you have mentioned that Lucas just gets his little ego knocked from here and there. Does Lucas ever? I mean, does he get beat up all the time?
No.
Okay,
no,
that's good.
Whew. Yeah, no, he doesn't. I mean, he's the one who starts off. Let me back up and put it this way. This is a romantic comedy, right? And I love romantic comedies, but usually the trope in the romantic comedy is it's the woman who's pining after the man, and the man comes and as the white knight, kind of a Pretty Woman style. And I really wanted to come at a rom-com from the opposite perspective, where at least, where the woman is the one who's kind of in control, at least romantically, and where the guy is the one who's kind of pining and overly emotional, right? Because men are like that sometimes, and especially young men, even if they don't want to admit it. And so we wanted to play with something different, but that means that for a good portion of the book, Lucas is really getting an education. But part of a character arc is actually like growing and changing. And so, over the course of the book, he becomes smarter and savvier and less of a dickwad and and more, but a better human being.
Just tell us how you really feel about Lucas.
No, I do. I like Lucas. I wrote Lucas, but so I think in the end, we wanted to bring it to a place where both of the characters have learned something and can kind of go off into the sunset, better people.
So do you think that lesson that you just mentioned, where you can go off into the sunset as better people, do you think that could be some value that people could get, even though it's a fiction novel? Aren't all novels fiction?
Yes.
I think I was redundant there. So, but even though it's a novel, do you think people could still take that lesson away and maybe even consider going through a similar exercise?
Jason, you want to take
I thought you were going to take that one. I mean, listen, going through this exercise, I would not recommend.
Not advise.
Yeah. I would not recommend. I can't imagine how that would ever be productive for anybody. But the DNA of it, which is to say being really open with your partner, and that doesn't have to just be a sexual partner, but being open with anybody who you are involved with in a pursuit. I mean, let's try to think of as broad a way of saying it as possible, is really useful. Of course, the thing that these characters do at the outset, which is the wrong thing to do, is that they each go for the jugular like immediately. And they do end up coming to an understanding, and I think that the open line of communication that they formed, which of course they created by kind of bursting a hole in a wall, ultimately becomes really useful to them. And I think that in many partnerships, the problem is frequently a lack of communication, that the two sides do not understand each other, and they maybe don't feel like they are fully able to articulate themselves to the other person, or don't feel understood by the other person. And that can spiral really fast. And the solution to it is not easy, but is also not complicated, which is start talking and start being honest and open, and things will improve. So in that way, I think that there's something here that everybody should do, but I would not advise publishing it in a magazine.
Yeah, absolutely. We really wanted to write a book that, that rings true on some level and resonates with people, but we wanted to write an escape. We wanted people to be able to kind of disappear into the world and the characters, to not worry about whatever it is that's happening, outside the pages of the book, and to feel good about it, at the end of the day. We want people to be happy and feel good, and they might learn a lesson or not, but at least you've had a few minutes of entertainment, of enjoyment,
Sure.
like lightheartedness, which we all need.
Well, exactly, and that's where I was about to say that. That's what novels are for, is for that escapism. Obviously not all of them are feel good in the end, but they are for that to get away from all the stresses of everyday life and get away from the office and get away from the kids. No, nobody really wants to get away from the kids, do they? Yes, they do. Get away from the kids, everything, just escape and enjoy whatever world it is that you've engrossed yourself in with whatever novel it is. So let me ask you this. What is the audience for this book? And I say that because...
Ooh, complicated question.
Exactly. And I say it, too, because of the subject matter. You know, can teenagers read this and come across educated, or is it a little too risque for them? How 50 Shades of Grey is the novel?
So the novel is not terribly 50 Shades of Grey. I mean, there is sex in the novel. In fact, so there's the audiobook of Mr. Nice Guy is coming out, and they hired an actor to read most of the narrative, but Jason and I read all of the columns. I read all of Carmen's columns. Okay. Jason read all of Lucas's columns. And we didn't realize until we were in the studio how embarrassing it was, because all of the sex is in the columns. And so we had to read all of the sexy parts.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. So because, what we did is we moved. I have not read 50 Shades of Grey, but I would assume.
Actually.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. But I read them all. I did. True story. I read them all. Oh, the movies were terrible, but I read the books.
Yeah. Well, so I would assume that the books try to in the narrative voice, right, in the voice of describing what's happening, gets really detailed. I would imagine about the actual sex, right?
Right.
Yeah. So we wanted to avoid that, and for any number of reasons, chief among them that I think that writing sex, not writing about sex, but writing sex is very awkward, and it's very hard to do it in a way that doesn't seem cliche and instantly a contender for the worst writing in sex awards. And so,
which exists, by the way.
Which exists, yeah, that's an actual award that comes out every year.
Wow.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's I think it's called it's Bad Writing in Sex Awards or something like that. And so the way that we handled it was that all the sex kind of happens off screen, so to say. So the narrative will take you where the two describing the two characters up until a point, and then it'll cut to the columns where they're describing it afterwards, right? So then at that point, it never feels like you're watching them. It feels like you're hearing about it from them, which is the difference between hearing about something from your friend and seeing them in action, which you don't want.
Right.
So that's how we handled it. And so for that reason, in particular, I'd say it's not a raunchy novel by any means. I think that you could easily, a very wide range of people could read it and feel very comfortable with it, because it's designed, it's like sex was in Sex and the City, right? Like sex was all throughout that show, but it wasn't a porn.
Unless it was Samantha, then
then it sometimes was, yeah. Right. But that was a conscious decision, and something that I in particular, as because I was writing the columns, was really wrestling with. Like, how do we do this, but not make it feel like you're like in for something?
Right. And how much did I just hurt my credibility when I said except for Samantha? So now in this one podcast, I've admitted to reading every 50 Shades of Grey novel. And I know the characters of Sex and the City.
Yeah, not what I would have expected from the guy with the Batman toy behind it.
My whole studio is Batman, so I've got the tough exterior, but on the inside, I'm just a softie.
But see, that's the thing. Like we're certainly marketing this novel to women, and I think that it will be very appealing for women anywhere from college age up through however old you want to be and
sure.
read some sexy fiction. But one of the main characters is a guy. The book was co-written by a man. And I think that I feel very strongly that I don't want men to, take a look at the art on the cover and be like, oh no, this isn't for me, because we were really not writing this in a gendered way. When we were writing it, we weren't thinking that it was for just a female audience. Like, it's about relationships, and a lot of relationships have both a man and a woman in them. So guys, there's something in there for you.
Awesome. So now the book is out and it's available on Amazon. Where else can we find it?
So Amazon, you can find it at your local independent bookstore. You can find it
at your local chain bookstore.
or your local chain bookstore. No, go to your local independent bookstore. And if they don't have it, tell them to order it. And that would make us very happy. But you can also go online to mrniceguynovel.com, and there'll be a bunch of links there as well.
Yeah. Oh, and wherever you get audiobooks. So, Audible, Scribd, wherever books are sold is, I think, the phrase.
If you want to hear us embarrass ourselves with sexy talk, get the audio version.
Right.
I'm going to have to listen to it, because I've done a couple of books as well, and I need to get some tips on my voice acting. So I'm going to listen to you two and take notes and improve my game a little bit.
I wouldn't do that.
Yeah, no, I don't either. But I got to say, I complimented you at the beginning, but I'm going to compliment you now as well. Like your voice game is strong. I mean, the thing that I think people misunderstand about doing voice is that you have to be really intentional about it. You have to be thinking about I always think of it as a character. Like I'm kind of embodying a character that speaks in a way that's different from the way that I would speak if I was like sitting in front of you at dinner or something. Because this is the way I've read it in the beginning. When I started listening to myself on mic, I realized that, they say the camera adds 10 pounds. I think that the microphone subtracts 5 energy points, which means that if you go on talking normally, you sound very low energy. So you have to amp it up so that when the microphone subtracts those energy points, you just sound normal and listenable.
Jason, you nailed it 100%. My voice coach tells that exact thing. You can always tone it down, but it's very difficult to bring it up. So start off just over the top and we can dial it back as we need to.
That's right.
So, well, hey, I've taken up plenty of your time already today, and I'm so thankful that I had the opportunity to talk to you, and you took time out of your day to share it with me. Are there any parting words that you'd like to share with the audience of maybe where, Jason, they could read some more of your writing, Jennifer, where they could read some more of your writing, anything like that?
Jason, have at it with your social.
Jen avoids social media as much as she can. So if anybody wants to get in touch with me, they can. I would suggest going to my website, jasonpfeiffer.com, where you can get links to all my stuff, all my various socials and the book and podcasts and whatever. So I go there and check it out. And definitely, if you check out this book, let us know. Say hi. Tell us what you think. Here's a parting thought is that people who create, and if you are in a situation where you create anything, you love hearing from people who enjoyed it. And then I think that we forget to then pass that along and do that at other people. Like I'll get an email from someone who read some column of mine or whatever, and they'll have really loved it. And that reminds me, I need to write the author of the next thing that I read that I really loved. I would pass that feeling along. So pass it along, man. If you read this book, reach out and let us know.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you.
Well, Jennifer and Jason, I can't thank you enough once again for coming on the show, and I can't wait to release the episode. But hang on for just a minute. You and I will talk just a little bit more as soon as I sign off right here. Hey, everybody. Thanks once again for listening to an exciting episode. It was exciting, wasn't it? Episode of the podcast. And remember, if you want to start your own podcast, check out my book, 1 + 1 = Podcast, where I simplify the equation of podcasting success. Thanks, everybody. We'll talk soon. Bye-bye.